myself and our National Vice President, Patty Adelberg, I would like to welcome you to the 2020 NFU Fall Virtual and Technical Training. We really wish we could see everybody in person. This is really one of the premier events for NFU and is critically important. But obviously with the challenges that we're facing today, it just simply wasn't possible to do that. But we also knew and understood that the issues are too great and the needs out there are just so important that it is critically important that we have some sort of process here to try to affect positive change with our legislators. So NFU has been nimble and has shifted processes around over the years as different challenges have arisen. And so this is another historical first for Farmers Union in creating this virtual fly-in for everyone. At this point, I'm pleased to report that we have an overwhelming response. We have over 400 registrants for this, which is absolutely amazing. And we'll be able to deploy all the teams to a number of Hill offices to deliver the critical messages that we will be talking through today. I want to walk through just a couple of pieces here, including the upcoming schedule for next week, and then talk a little bit about what you will be receiving as part of this training. First of all, for a quick overview of the agenda. Next week on Monday, September 14th at noon, we will have our USDA virtual briefing. We'll hear from Secretary Perdue and some other cabinet level officials there. On Tuesday, we will have the congressional leadership briefing. We have a number of speakers lined up there, including Speaker Nancy Pelosi, House Agriculture Committee Chairman Colin Peterson, as well as Senator Stabenow, Senator Tester, and others. On Wednesday, September 16th, from noon to 1, we'll be having a really important memorandum of understanding, MOU signing, with the Minorities in Agriculture and Natural Resources and Related Sciences. This is an organization that has been dedicated for nearly 35 years with creating opportunities for people of color, students in the ag sciences, to present opportunities for them through business, agribusiness, and we are being a leader in creating that opportunity now within the farm organizations. So this will mean as we develop this memorandum of understanding, we'll create internship opportunities as well as educational opportunities to swap information back and forth. Really important as we strive to make sure that we are living our values here as Farmers Union. On Thursday, we'll have a breakout discussion on Postal Service and the threats that are ongoing there. That will be from 1 to 2 p.m. And on Thursday, we'll have a wrap-up event where we can swap stories, share some of the really positive things that have happened over the course of the week, as well as some entertainment coming up. So it should be great fun. Obviously, in between all of these other programming will be the core pieces of the fly-in itself. Those individual meetings that you'll be holding with senators and members of the House to, again, talk about those key priorities and all of the challenges that are facing family farmers and ranchers right now. As you listen to the tips and the information that we have, it may, particularly if you're new to fly-in, this may seem a little overwhelming. It may be a lot of information, but please don't sweat it. Make sure that you understand that you don't have to be an expert in these. You'll have your team, you will have cheat sheets, and you'll be able to, as you hear these information, recognize the challenges from your own perspective, what it means for your farm, for your family, for your rural community. And really, that's the value of fly-in. Farmers Union members coming together to tell their story from the farm level. It's critically important. We so value your time and effort that you're willing to give to us for this. We want to make sure that we answer your questions today. And at this time, I'd like to introduce one of our fly-in veterans, somebody here to offer up some fly-in tips and tricks Olivia Taylor Puckett from Kansas Farmers Union. Olivia.
Hi, hello everybody. Thank you, Rob, for that introduction. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. I think that we have a poll that we're going to ask people. And so it's how many of you have met with a member of Congress before? All right, so it looks like the vast majority of all of us here on the call have, which would make sense since this is, I think, a team captain training for a good portion of all of us. All right, so what I'm going to talk today is I'm going to share a little bit of how in the past, when I've been a team captain last year, how I structured the team coordination before our meetings, how I structured the research that I did in preparation for the meetings with the office members, and then how we actually followed through on that work and research during the meetings to kind of make it the most effective that we could do. So I went into my thinking last year with kind of having 3 goals. So my first goal was to advocate on behalf of NFU's identified issue priorities, because that's what we're here to do. For a good part, we're here to be able to lend authority and some context for the government relations team, so that when they go in to to have meetings on these issues, the members have already heard stories from people on the ground. The second goal that I have is to empower the team members to speak on the issues that are affecting them in their everyday lives. And ultimately, you guys are the ones taking the time out of your day. And when we do this in person, going to a whole different part of the country to meet with congressional members and share your stories and advance the issues that are relevant to your lives. And so the third thing that I thought about was establishing a common ground with every office that we hold meetings with. So not every office that we're going to go to is going to be a major economic driver of their district. Not everybody is going to have commodity crops. Not everyone's going to have specialty crops or dairies, but since we all eat, we know that all these issues affect all of us all the time, every day, and every congressional office should care about these issues. So finding some common grounds with the offices that maybe aren't our representatives, I think are a really important thing, because it also gives Farmers Union a really good name that we are an all-encompassing organization for the most part. So before the meetings, we should coordinate with our teams. And so what that looks like is reviewing the lawmakers that you have assigned to your team. So when I was a captain, I did some background research on each lawmaker to see what were the major issues in their district. Are there things that they have in common with us? If like they have a VA or veterans issues are a big issue for the congressperson, then we can talk about the Veteran and Beginning Farmer program and establish some common ground there. So you go in, you do some research on what's in the district and try and identify some common ground between the NFU talking points and the issues that that congressperson already cares about in the first place. And so then the next step is to go through and sit down with your team members. I think probably via Zoom call or a phone call will work. Sometimes emails can work well for this, but just to get a sense of what the stories of your team members are. And so you have everybody say, what are the big issues that they are experiencing in their lives and what do they want to talk about? And then as a team captain, you can integrate that into both the issues NFU has identified us needing to cover and also the issues that might be relevant to that district. So you can kind of put all 3 of these pieces together to make a really effective story and layout for your meetings. So once you've done research on what the office member cares about, what your team members care about, and then you've looked at what NFU wants us to be talking about, then you can kind of go through and plot the line of the story that you want the meetings to have. So one of the first things I did with my team members was I kind of tried to gauge the comfort level of each of my team members speaking, because these were in-person meetings. And it can be really intimidating to go into a congressional office and you don't know if you're going to actually get the meeting with the senator or the congressperson, or if you're just going to get a staff member. So identifying in advance the order of speaking can help give your team members a sense of comfort. They know who's going to be talking before them. They know when they're supposed to speak, and they know who's going to be talking after them. And it also kind of gets rid of those potential awkward silences when you're having your meetings, where people are nervous to speak, that you don't want to talk over each other. I know that can be an issue with Zooms now, but I think that a lot of us have done a lot of Zooms recently. But identifying the comfort level of your team members to speak is really important. So what I did was I actually had an interesting team last year. Most of us actually didn't do commodity crop production. So we were mostly specialty crops, which is kind of unique from Kansas. And so I looked at what the offices cared about. I looked at what my team members cared about. And then I looked at what NFU wanted us to talk about. And I identified that I had a veteran on my team. And so everybody cares about veterans issues in every district, as we all should. And so that was a good common ground, not aggressive first thing to talk about. And he was also very comfortable speaking. So I had him go first after I introduced the team members. And so he would lead in, and then he led into the next person's talking point, which was a smaller farm, and she had an off-farm job so that she could have health insurance. But if she didn't have to have an off-farm job for health insurance, she could have expanded her farm by now. She had the finances to be able to do it. She had the customer base who wanted her to expand her farm. And so the only thing holding her back was the time that she had, because a certain amount of her time was being taken up by the off-farm job just to get health insurance, which is a broader issue that every district is going to have to care about as well. So putting in order your team speaking points is important to give clarity to your message, and to also empower your team members to only have to worry about what they're going to say, not when they're going to say it, which can be which can be a major stress point for some people, especially if you have less experienced team members for this year. And so when I was identifying the issues, and sometimes there can be some open spots where where the stories of the team members don't necessarily match up with the talking points of NFU. And so as a team captain, I thought it was my responsibility to be able to kind of fill those gaps. So I would have the team members speak on the issues that NFU presents that's relevant to them. And then as a team captain, I would alternate between team member, then myself, then another team member, then myself, so that we could make sure that it was a cohesive narrative, but that we were also hitting those National Farmers Union talking points, which is really, really important, so that our government relations team can come back in and say, well, you heard from our farmers that these are actually farmers and ranchers and fishers, that these are actually really big issues, like they told you in the meetings they just had. And so let's actually get down to working on working something out together on these issues. And so it's really important to always be polite in your team meetings as well. And some of the best advice I ever got which was from Tom Giesel on my first Farmers Union fly-in, was on empowerment of your members. And so this does tie in with being polite, I promise. So we all are taking the time out of our day to talk with these members, and we pay them with our taxes. And so they should listen to us, even if we're not in their district or their constituents. We are still Americans here talking to the people who are running our federal government, and we deserve their time. And we know we know our lived experiences, and we are our own experts on our own lives. So we should feel empowered to be able to talk on our issues, and they should be listening. And so I like to say, if someone pushes back on an issue that you're talking about, that's fine. You just say, this is my lived experience. This is what I know to be true. And so the conversation is more so about what the solutions are, which is something that the government relations team works on more so than in these meetings. But if there is debate or pushback, I always recommend that it be focused more so on the solutions and not whether the issue actually exists or not. Because if you're talking about it and you're experiencing the issue, then obviously it exists. But it's important to be polite, be cordial, be respectful of these people, and they should do the same for us. Following through with the plan is going through the speaking order that you identified would be an impactful storyline and narrative, and letting your team members know in advance so that they understand that there's going to be a certain set way of speaking, and then being sure that you send thank you notes I don't know if we're doing that by email or if we're doing that physically this year, but be sure that you do that because it is a really nice touch for the offices. And then remember why you're here and why you're doing this. You're here to share a story. Your team members are here to share a story. We're here to advocate for NFU issues, to lend authority to the government relations team when they come back into the offices after fly-in, virtually or in person, should that ever happen again. And make sure that your team members really feel like they know that they can say their stories, that they feel that there are connections to the NFU talking points, and that it's just really important to give our team members a sense of empowerment because it can be really intimidating sometimes. I know that this year is going to be different, but we should all remember we're here to work together and to advocate and to bring awareness to the issues that we're all facing, awareness to the issues that Farmers Union is advocating for, and to find common ground with all of the offices so that we leave a really great impression and can expand the base of congressional members and Senate members who are willing to work with us. So I think that's a lot of what I've got. So primarily making sure you do research on the districts in advance, making sure that you understand the stories that your team members have to share, finding the common ground between those two, and then taking responsibility for making sure the NFU talking points get covered as well. And then empowering your team members to know that they are here to share their story. They're worth listening to. They should be listened to. Your stories are worth being told and worth being heard and worth being taken into account for federal policy consideration. And that NFU is strong and our team members are incredible and capable too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivia. Fantastic tips and tricks there for successful meetings. And we will have Q&A opportunities, one coming up on kind of technical issues. And then certainly as we go through the issues and so forth, there will also be an opportunity. Go ahead and put questions into the chat as you have them, and we'll try to address as many as absolutely possible here. I would also note at this point that this session is being recorded. So if for some reason you need to step away for part of this, you will be able to access this training a little bit later. And if you're joining this a little bit later on recorded, because of a snafu that we had with the email links going out, ended up in a lot of folks' spam filters. We apologize for that. Technical glitches happen. We appreciate your patience with that, but know that we will try to address all of your questions. You may have noticed I actually froze up there a little bit and had to restart the program here for Zoom. And that's just a reflection actually of one of our talking points that talks about the importance of rural broadband here at the farm in West Virginia. It's a really big challenge. And so if there are any of those glitches that happen in your meetings, it's a perfect opportunity to kind of just really talk about why connectivity is a real problem in a lot of rural America, and the challenges are real there. At this time, though, I would turn our agenda over to the technical aspects of the meetings, and I'll turn it to Adam Mellis, who is with Aristotle, our technical vendor. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much for having me here. I also have a bit of a poll that I want to share, just to sort of get an idea of the audience here. You know, a lot of us have been connecting with family and friends online for the last 6 months in ways we hadn't before. And so it certainly is something that is a good thing to share. And you know, I know some of you are connected only by phone, and some of you are connected online, and you know, I think it's great that we are, you know, doing a lot more these days, connectivity wise. So, couple of things I want to share. We've been in the process of setting up the meetings for everyone, and I'm going to stop the poll now and just let people see the results here. And it looks like a lot of you are in the same boat as I am, where we have more times than we can count been connected by video. And for others, it's first time. I think that's great. You know, it grows on you sometimes. So But we've been setting up appointments, and some of you will have appointments via Zoom, some of you will have appointments via another platform with video conferencing, and some of you will just be on a simple conference call due to the preference of the congressional office. And we're in the process of setting those appointments up, and I'll touch on the ways you're going to be informed on those appointments shortly. So in looking at some tips, though, for those of you who are on video calls, and I think Olivia did a great job, and a lot of the tips on being an advocate, a couple of things to sort of keep in mind. The microphone knows all. I have a coworker who types very loudly, and we know that he is typing away when we're on a team meeting because we can hear his keyboard. Be comfortable with it. You know, certain things you can control, certain things you can't control. But you know, just sort of know where your mute button is, and know how to let things sort of sit the way they are. If you can, level your camera. I literally have my computer sitting on a stack of about 5 books right now, which sort of helps the angle of the camera, helps things viewed in certain ways, and really kind of helps, you know, other aspects, so it's less of a distraction. Testing your camera angle. This is a picture I took of me last night. I had my computer sort of at an odd angle. I call this the Lefkowitz look. One of my children's teachers is a guy named Lefkowitz, and he, for some reason, has always just see his nose and eyes. Making sure you have a background that's appropriate. Certainly backgrounds can become a distraction. You know, you can use if you're in Zoom or some of the other platforms, you can have a background, a green screen similar to what I have right now. And the other thing is declutter your computer. And I strongly recommend that you just close out of everything. I typically have about 20 different windows open. Right now, I have all my windows closed except for this one. And that way, I'm not distracted by other things that are coming in. You know, it's important to make sure that you treat this meeting as any meeting, whether it be a meeting in person or not. And I think sometimes we forget as a society that even though we're on a computer, we're still trying to interact with people face to face. So those are sort of some of the tips on the video conferencing and conference calls. You know, I'd also add, just try to make sure that you're indoors in a quiet space when you're doing those kinds of things. Now to touch on other bits of the technology. In the next day or so, you'll be receiving an email from the National Farmers Union that will ask you to register for an application. This is a mobile application that you can use on a smartphone or on a computer. In that application, you'll have to create an account and log in with an ID and a password, and you're good to go. We will be storing your appointments in that application. You will be also receiving those appointments via email as well, but so you'll have multiple places where the appointments are going to be stored. The great thing is that the application will allow you to share your notes. And so if we could have a few screenshots here of what it will sort of look like, you'll actually see NFU branding on here, but essentially once you log in, you'll be able to look at legislator information, you'll be able to look at contacts for the offices, and you'll see a box that says appointments and activities. And those activities, if you open that box, you'll see a list of the appointments that we've been able to get for your state and your delegation and your teams. And from there, if you open up the activity, you'll be able to see the details of the Zoom link or the conference call information. You'll be able to see the details of if it's a staff person in the meeting or if it's the member of Congress themselves. And as you scroll down, and I have a sort of a closer up picture of this, as you scroll down, you'll be also see a place where you can put your notes and describe what happens in the meeting. And as you put those notes in and you hit add activity, those notes for your meeting is going to be shared online, be able to share it online. Unfortunately, I hear that my mic is muffled. Thank you for the notes there. I hope this is a little bit better. You'll be able to share those notes online, and ultimately NFU staff will be able to see those notes appropriately while they're going forward. Hopefully you'll have no issue in downloading these things and be able to go forward. As you can see, the mic static is a little bit of a problem, and I'm sorry about that. Hopefully those of you who are able to hear me clearly will be able to get connected appropriately. If you have questions, I can be reached through the confirmation of the webinar. My email address is part of that, and we'll be able to certainly be able to get additional information. But I'm looking forward to working with y'all. If you have questions later on, I'm certainly happy to answer some of the technical ones as well. I believe I'm going to turn things back over to Mike.
Thank you, Adam.
Or Rob. Sorry, Rob.
Yep. That's okay. Mike will be taking the reins here in just a minute, but I appreciate the technical tips. And actually the observation on the microphone is really key and prompts, at least for me, sometimes when I may be switching platforms and my mic sounded perfectly great on one platform and then on another it was a challenge. So I would just remind folks that it's always helpful to go on into your platform a little bit early and test your microphone, test your video, just to kind of make sure that what you don't want on the screen isn't there, and that your sound quality is because sometimes it's pretty confounding where you haven't changed anything, no settings on your computer, and suddenly the microphone is picking it up differently. So take the time. You can make adjustments on that. So having a little built-in time there to adjust will be helpful, I think, to everyone. There were a couple of other questions that I noticed, and I'll probably miss some, so we'll continue to try to get to them. But there was a question about how to dress for these meetings. I think it's appropriate because we are meeting with members of the Senate and the House of Representatives to dress as you might expect to dress for those meetings. Now, if you don't have a jacket and tie, for example, wearing something, a nice shirt and so forth, something that isn't going to, that kind of speaks to that kind of respect that Olivia was talking about, that they will be kind of respectful of you and the meeting, and conversely. Don't overthink it or sweat it, but I would keep in mind that we are meeting with these congressional offices, and so I think that it will be important to dress professionally there. Let's see, at this time though, there was another quick question about backgrounds. These backgrounds, if I'm correct, Mike will correct me if I'm wrong, are available actually on the NFU website under the nfu.org/flyin with a hyphen. There you will find all your talking points, other tips, as well as the virtual backgrounds that you can use in Zoom. So, and as Mike is pointing out, he's got the cows there. Anyway, no requirement to use them. Sometimes you might try them and it looks a little too fake for you. So again, having that built-in time, you'll be able to figure out whether or not it works for you. At this point though, we will dive right into the issues, talking through the key priorities from our government relations team. And first up, we will hear from Aaron. Aaron Shire, go for it.
Thanks so much, Rob. I hope everyone can hear me all right. And if they can't, please throw something in the chat. So I'm going to talk about our first topic here. You see the list of issues. The first one is reforming agricultural markets. And that's a big topic. So what do we mean by this? So the coronavirus pandemic has really upended so many things, including our farm and food system, leading to supply chain disruptions and, in many cases, higher prices for consumers and lower prices paid to farmers. So this context of the pandemic, it might be new, but the problems we're facing, all of us are facing, really aren't in regards to agricultural markets. They're symptoms of long-standing problems, namely one, corporate consolidation in agriculture, and second, low prices precipitated by overproduction. You know, we used to have a much more diverse and regionalized farm and food system, but today that system's highly concentrated for a multitude of reasons, including lax antitrust enforcement. So that concentration is perhaps most stark in livestock markets. And threw some numbers up here to illustrate that for you. First of all, 50 meat plants now slaughter and process 98% of our national meat supply. 1,100 meat plants operate in the US compared to about 10,000 in 1967. So a huge reduction. And today, only 4 companies produce, slaughter and process about 85% of our beef supply. So what this means is, first, livestock markets are susceptible to shocks, as we've seen with the pandemic, but in other situations as well. And second, that farmers are disadvantaged in the marketplace as a result of this. So moving on to the next slide, and sorry to everyone for my fading audio. I thought I had corrected that issue, but I hope you can hear most of this. What can you ask your member of Congress to do about some of the problems I just outlined? So first, you can ask your member of Congress to help small and regional meat processors access new markets. And more specifically, a particular bill you could focus on is what's known as the Ramp Up Act. And this bill would help state-inspected and custom-exempt slaughter facilities gain federal inspection and access interstate markets. Another bill you can talk about is a bit of a mouthful. It's the Small Packer Overtime and Holiday Fee Relief Act. You can just think about it as the overtime bill, and this would help small slaughter plants pay the burdensome costs, overtime, and holiday work for federal inspectors at their plants. Second, restoring competition to livestock markets. You know, we need to restore competition and improve transparency in livestock markets, and also just the farm economy more generally. And so what can you ask your member of Congress to do about this? First, a timely one, hold hearings on livestock mandatory price reporting, key to transparency in livestock markets, and to reauthorize that legislation. Second, you can talk about a bill. It's Senator Tester of Montana and Senator Grassley of Iowa's so-called spot markets bill. It would require a minimum of 50% of the weekly volume of beef slaughter for large meat processors to come from the open or spot market. And finally, more generally, demand stronger enforcement of our existing antitrust laws and competition regulations in agricultural markets. They are not sufficiently enforced. It's always good to remind our lawmakers that those laws are on the books. Finally, this last bullet here is establish a supply management system to stabilize prices. This is that third area of focus. Our current farm policy really encourages overproduction, and that leads to frequent periods of low commodity prices. And so you can ask your member of Congress that we need to establish a supply management system to address that problem, to prevent chronic overproduction, stabilize prices for dairy and other commodities as well. Thanks very much. Sorry about the audio issues, and I'll hand you over here now to our Vice President of Advocacy, Mike Strands.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you all for being part of the show today. Again, I'm Mike Strands, Vice President of Advocacy for National Farmers Union, and I'm going to talk about our second fly-in topic today, and that is to support pandemic recovery. it's been, who would have thought about 8 months ago in early 2020 that Congress and the administration would be approving trillions and trillions of dollars in emergency spending, that the economy would be turned on its head, that we'd be facing a global health crisis like we've never faced before, or at least in many, many decades. And as a result, things have changed and very quickly. And with the passage of some of the stimulus bills and pandemic recovery efforts, there's a lot of ways to improve, and there's been a lot of problems with how it's worked out. At the same time, we also recognize that drastic and swift action needed to be taken. So it's difficult to cast stones at the efforts to have a quick response to the pandemic and the resulting economic crisis. So first off, just on supporting the pandemic relief, got three main issues for that, and that's to provide family farmers with the help they need to withstand the pandemic, to oversee the coronavirus food assistance program to ensure it's distributed fairly and equitably amongst farmers and ranchers, and to ensure that all Americans can afford to feed their families. A quick look at some numbers that came out recently from USDA. On September 2nd, USDA issued their annual projections for what net farm income will be for this year. And in this case, cash receipts for crops and livestock are expected to decline by $12 billion, or about 3% from 2019 to 2020. So with that, U.S. farm cash receipts will be at their lowest level in more than a decade, and below the 10-year average of $376 billion a year. Those are some big numbers and some drastic drops that have come on top of years that where there have been consistent declines year in and year out. So one important point, though, is that net farm income for 2020 is supposed to rise $19 billion from the previous year. So you hear about why the farm economy is doing so poorly. Why are we expecting to see net farm income go up in 2020? Well, the answer for that is looking at the chart on the PowerPoint right now. You can see net farm income has bounced around a little bit. That's the green bar in recent years. That smaller tan goldish colored bar below shows how much of net farm income comes from federal farm program payments. And it's steadily increased. You can see the percentage of that in the blue line there. So the reason why we're seeing higher net farm income is because we've got a lot more federal farm program payments going out the door, largely from programs this year from the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, and in previous years from MFP and other trade aid or kind of bailout payments, as some would call it. So that's made for a different situation than we've had in the past, and we need to make sure we're making the most of those federal assistance dollars. Again, the CARES Act, you'll remember that as the multi-trillion-dollar bill that passed back in March, included a mixture of money and funding streams for farm assistance. It used authority existing that USDA can use money in the Commodity Credit Corporation, and it also included some additional authorized spending specifically for farm aid. With that, USDA created the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, which I'll refer to as CFAP from now on. CFAP, as of a couple weeks ago, has paid out $9.5 billion to nearly 600,000 approved applicants across the country. 4.7 billion of that went to livestock producers, 2.5 billion went to 300,000 commodity growers, 1.7 billion went to dairy farmers, and about 530 million went to specialty crop growers. That's just the agriculture portion of the CARES Act and related bills. Of course, there was a lot of other assistance that went out to Americans, including stimulus checks, the new SBA programs through the Small Business Administration that tried to keep businesses afloat and being able to make their payroll throughout the pandemic. So that's just a look at some of the numbers there. We see an increase in net farm income because we see a drastic increase in the amount of spending on farm assistance programs by USDA. So as I mentioned before, 80% of CFAP spending has gone to just 3 commodities: beef, dairy, and corn. It's not to say that that wasn't needed, but there's also a lot of other assistance and others who have felt the impact of the pandemic that need assistance. As I also mentioned, we've seen a reduction in farm prices. In fact, it's down 4.8% compared to a year ago. And then keeping all of this in perspective, about 20% of Americans with children can't afford enough food for their family. A lot of groups have reached out to USDA for assistance amongst the farm community. We need to make sure we're taking care of and helping the hungry Americans amongst us as well. This doesn't need to be a one or the other situation. It ought to be both. Feeding Americans, that's our job as farmers and ranchers in this country, and we should make sure that people can do that. So we support an increase in SNAP spending and increasing the monthly minimum benefit from $16 to $30 a month and boosting the maximum monthly benefit by 15%. So again, to kind of recap our main asks here, we need to make sure families, farmers have the financial support they need to withstand the pandemic. As further stimulus legislation is debated, we need to make sure that additional funding for ag assistance is included, but that it's done right. And there's a few ways that could be done. One is through a bill called the Farming to Support States Act, introduced by Senator Baldwin of Wisconsin, which would direct funds to state governments so that the agriculture departments in those states can distribute the money to farmers based on the conditions in each state. Another is to support the Food Supply Protection Act, which would distribute surplus foods from farmers to food banks and other nutrition programs. And then also, if there are additional changes to the Small Business Administration programs, we need to make sure that farms that had negative returns in recent years, as many did because of the decline in market prices, that they have eligibility and that they can participate. So that's a quick rundown of the Support Pandemic Recovery section of our points for the fly-in. Again, these points and much more can be accessed on our webpage for the fly-in, nfu.org/fly-in, and you can find all that there. So with that, I'll turn it over next to Layla Soberanis, who will talk to us more about rural resilience and how we can help recover with our infrastructure. So strengthening rural infrastructure, and that goes to you, Layla.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon to you all. I'm Layla Soberanis, Senior Government Relations Representative for NFU. In this section, I will discuss the importance of rural infrastructure and help provide you with the tools you'll need to advocate for change with your members of Congress. About 46 million Americans live in rural areas which are facing distinctive challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic. Longstanding systematic health and access inequalities have put many rural communities at an increased risk of getting COVID-19 or making a pre-existing illness worse. With the majority of our country moving online and working and learning from home, many of these same rural residents are at a large disadvantage, not only lacking healthcare and mental health resources, but also access to broadband. The pandemic has unmasked a great deal of issues for the U.S. Postal Service as well, a combination of financial problems, pandemic, and politics polarization. Throughout these hard times, many Americans have and are relying on mail deliveries, especially farmers and folks in rural areas. When farmers depend on the mail to deliver live animals and commodities, the luxury of a margin of error just plainly does not exist. Tracking down delayed checks, prescriptions, and other shipments can take hours, especially in areas without quick and reliable internet. That is why reliable and affordable high-speed internet is fundamental for not only economic activity throughout the United States, but also for our current time and for the future. Many industries are now more than ever also greatly relying on internet access to run their businesses, communicate, and survive. For many farmers, agricultural production via the internet is a modern day necessity, and speaking to you all here through your screens is the very example of how important reliable broadband is for you, your families, and your communities. Turning over to healthcare, as we round up 7 months in quarantine, we hope you and your families are doing well. Healthcare has been front and center during this pandemic, especially for folks in rural areas. A fourth of hospitals are at a risk of closure, and this was before the pandemic. Revenue pressure, complex patient population, and the trouble attracting and retaining providers has been a huge problem. So it's critical that rural hospitals get the resources to stay open and to continue providing adequate service and care. Rural hospitals are in financial distress, forcing many to shut down their doors. According to a 2018 GAO report, 64 rural hospitals closed between 2013 and 2017, which is more than twice the number of closures in the preceding 5-year period. With revenue pressure, rural areas have fewer commercial payers than more urban markets, which signifies that these hospitals have a higher volume of state-funded healthcare with lower reimbursement rates. Also, with a complex patient population, the US population ages and struggles with chronic conditions. For example, studies show that 18% of people age 65 and older in rural communities compared to the 14% in rural areas, and 18% have limitations due to chronic conditions compared to the 13% in rural communities. These patients require more services and more specialties than younger patients. The other issue is that attracting and retaining providers is also a problem. Remote locations have a harder time recruiting full-time physicians, especially in specific specialties ranging from orthopedics to neurology. So while rural patients still need these services, rural hospitals are often only able to offer them once a week, once a month, alternating coverage with subspecialties. Therefore, during our virtual fly-in, we asked that Congress set a 20% rural benchmark in what is known as a provider relief fund that will prioritize facilities with the greatest financial need, those hit hardest by COVID-19 and those serving a large portion of at-risk patients. Turning over also to mental health, under healthcare, we must also prioritize the need for mental health resources. 60% of rural Americans live in mental health shortage areas where the cost of not having where to go, having to drive long distances, prevents many from seeking the actual help that they need and they can get. So we ask Congress to strengthen mental health resources for agricultural professional and rural residents. We ask that they also continue to fully fund what is known as the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network. And we ask that they allocate funding for farmer and rancher stress management training programs to the existing USDA mission areas and agencies. With rural broadband, 35% of rural Americans do not have access to broadband. During this pandemic, many Americans have quarantined, including myself, with Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, and other media streaming devices. It's unfair when someone has to use their cellular signal to watch a program with their monthly data allotment only to run out of data, or unfortunately have to drive to the nearest McDonald's or Burger King to get Wi-Fi to finish a school project. It simply is just not fair. Under the Universal Broadband Act, Congress is looking to support legislation that enables connectivity for schools, libraries, rural high-cost areas, and low-income households. This bill, introduced by Congressman Sam Graves and Congressman Katko, provides federal grants for public-private efforts to expand broadband. It also allows the use of these grants through what is known as the Economic Development Administration to complete the projects. And traditionally, these grants are used for distressed communities and has been in the past an untapped resource. So very important to talk about the Universal Broadband Act. The second bill I'm going to talk about is called the eBridge Act. Congress is looking to support legislation that will direct funding to states and Indian tribes to deploy affordable high-speed broadband in unserved and underserved communities. House Agriculture Committee Chairman Colin Peterson and Congressman Don Young from Alaska have introduced the bill, and it would do a build out through the Federal Communications Commission, what is known as the Universal Service Fund, and it will provide the ability to give funding for rural broadband. The last thing I will mention, U.S. Postal Service. As mentioned prior, for decades, postal carriers have delivered chicks, ducklings, bees, plants, and other live animals to farmers. The list goes on. Some chicks are getting lost in the chaos of coronavirus, online ordering and slow delivery, forcing many farmers to find alternatives. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy announced that all changes being made to the Postal Service should be suspended until after the November 3rd election. However, actions that have already been taken are ordering postal employees to leave the mail packages behind, rather than work overtime or make multiple trips to complete their routes, as many of them have been doing to address the high increase of pandemic-related package demand. Under DeJoy's leadership, the United States Postal Service has also removed more than 600 high-speed mail sorting machines ranging from Pennsylvania to Florida, has disconnected mail sorting machines, either prevented them from being reconnected, or are just heaping wrecks in post office parking lots. Also, blue collection boxes from neighborhoods across the country have been removed, and the Postal Service has warned that, quote, 46 states and DC cannot guarantee all ballots cast by mail for the November election will arrive in time to be counted. It's very, very concerning. So as we talk to Congress on this issue, we have to emphasize the protection of the US Postal Service. Postal unions have pushed members of Congress to recognize the need for public service appropriations and emergency funding in order for the Postal Service to financially survive the pandemic. As we have these conversations, we want to emphasize a few points on this matter. One being that emergency relief is provided for the Postal Service, that mail sorting machines and mailboxes are restored, and we wish to reverse any changes that can cause delivery delays. We also want overtime for the postal workers who have continued to work throughout this pandemic to deliver mail on time and have put themselves in the line of fire. So as an overview of our asks, as you start having your Hill meeting conversations, the 4 big asks, remember, from rural infrastructure, I'll spell out right now. 1 is ensuring that rural hospitals have the necessary tools to stay open and provide adequate care. 2, the need to strengthen mental health resources for agricultural professionals and rural residents. And 3, broadband connectivity in rural areas. And 4, ensure that prompt mail delivery is affordable rate, not only for rural America, but for all parts of the country. So with that, I would like to introduce Ann Steckel, who will be talking about biofuels. Thanks.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. Thanks for sticking with us through this long briefing. I know we've been throwing a lot of information in your direction, but just want to quickly update you on biofuels and some asks that we have as you go speak with your members of Congress. So as we all know, the coronavirus has been really difficult for those of us in agriculture. It's also been very difficult for those in the renewable fuels industry. Gasoline demand went down, people just weren't driving. So the effects that had on ethanol plants were very dramatic. And so the effects that had on our corn markets and soybean markets and so forth and so on was also a big effect. And so we've got a really big situation at hand where we're asking for funding through this next stimulus bill for renewable fuels. There are 2 bills that have been introduced in Congress. They are the Renewable Fuels Feedstock Reimbursement Act, which essentially would assist renewable fuels producers for feedstocks they purchased during the first quarter of 2020. And the other bill in the House is establishing a renewable fuel reimbursement program to pay ethanol and other biofuel plants 45 cents for every gallon produced between January 1st and May 1st. So as you go to folks on Capitol Hill and you have these office visits next week, we'd ask for their support on those 2 pieces of legislation and to have some sort of support package be put in the next stimulus package that Congress is debating. It's really important, although there has been money that's been directed towards agriculture. We've been hearing pushback from the USDA Ag Secretary saying that they needed an actual language in any sort of stimulus bill, specifically carving out money for this program. And so that's why we're asking for this within the next stimulus bill. And to really aggravate the situation, in addition to what we've had going on with COVID and the lack of driving and the lack of demand for renewable fuels, this administration really hasn't been a great friend towards biofuels. They have allowed a lot of small refinery exemptions, which essentially allow oil refiners to be exempt from their obligation under the Renewable Fuels Act, which has been very dramatic. we've seen a very big loss in the amount of renewable fuels that have been used over the last few years. This administration really has been unwilling to allow higher level blends of ethanol either, something that NFU has worked very hard on. And so we really feel like these are big missed opportunities in terms of all of the good effects that renewable fuels has within cleaning our air and rural revitalization and things of that nature. So the other piece of legislation and the other ask we have as you go to Capitol Hill involves these small refinery exemptions in legislation that's been introduced in both the House and the Senate. And that is the Renewable Fuel Standard Integrity Act, which essentially says there should be more transparency around all of these small refinery exemptions. It sets different deadlines. It ensures that there are very strong qualifications if you have economic harm, how you outline that economic harm if you're a refinery. So everything is very transparent and that everyone in the industry knows exactly why you're applying for a small refinery exemption and what are the qualifications for getting them. So to shed more light on this small refinery exemption issue. There's certainly more information on all of this on our website, and we'll also be doing some one-pagers on all of this that we'll get to you guys as well. But just wanted to outline that for you. And now I will hand it over to Jenny Hopkinson, who is going to talk to us about climate.
Thanks, Anne. And I think that the discussion on biofuels and our asks on biofuels are really important also in the context of climate change. Of course, climate change has been a big issue over the past couple of years and one that we continue to work on. And especially in light of ongoing interest on Capitol Hill on climate change. So this is a really good time to be talking about it. Just as a reminder, NFU policy supports comprehensive federal climate efforts that build on USDA's voluntary incentive-based conservation programs that support on-farm production of renewable energy and biofuels, which is of course a key part, and encourages market-based solutions. And that looks at a range of issues from tax incentives all the way to carbon markets. And so, you know, the final piece of our policy on that is that we want kind of strong research, publicly funded research that'll provide tools to farmers and ranchers of all sizes to implement changes to kind of help curb the effects of climate change, to make land more resilient, and to sequester carbon. And it's just important to note, you know, farmers have always worried about their soil health. They've always been good stewards of the environment. We just recently have learned more about certain practices and certain techniques that may have different results that can make land more resilient and can sequester carbon and kind of help to deal with climate change a little bit. So as part of this, you know, our fly-in is coming at a really interesting time in terms of climate talks on Capitol Hill. This summer, we've seen the House Democrats and Senate Democrats lay out plans for tackling climate change that include agriculture and reflect our calls for these voluntary incentive-based and market-based programs. You know, Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden has a climate plan out, and USDA is talking about sustainability and carbon sequestration as part of their agricultural innovation agenda, where they're looking to research needs and other programs to tackle climate issues. So as part of this, you know, we really want to drive a message home to lawmakers that this is a good time to be talking about climate, and that there are practical and common sense things that can be done for farmers and ranchers that can help farmers and ranchers, provide them with tools to lead and innovate to solutions that, you know, hopefully will work for everybody and, you know, curb the effects of climate change. And so the asks here are to, again, provide farmers and ranchers with tools to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And as a piece of that, to co-sponsor the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which is a bipartisan bill that would help farmers participate in carbon markets and would require USDA to really recognize the role of carbon markets. It isn't a regulatory system on carbon markets, but it, you know, would require USDA to recognize them and give those systems that backing. You know, we should also be asking lawmakers to support strong public funding for agricultural research on climate-related issues and programs. You know, the tools that come from this research and the tools that farmers need should be available and affordable and not controlled by the private sector. And to ensure family farmers and ranchers have a seat at the table and a strong voice in the development of these climate policies and programs. And so really kind of driving home that point that farmers and ranchers need those tools to mitigate and adapt to climate change, and that lawmakers should be doing what they can to generate them, to provide them, and to empower USDA to take action. And certainly along with those asks, I know Anne talked about them, but I'll just reiterate that kind of we should ask to help the biofuels industry recover fully from the impact of the pandemic. That's an important piece of climate policy, and also to prevent the abuse of small refinery exemptions. And with that, I will turn it back to Mike. Or sorry, I will turn it back to Rob. So yeah, Rob, if you're ready.
All right, thanks so much, Jenny. And whew, that was quite a bit of information being thrown at you. For some of those topics, you may be experts in them, and so you were following along very closely. Other issues may be quite new to you, and it was a lot of information coming at you that was tough to absorb. But not to worry. First of all, we will continue to take questions here that you guys have on these. And again, I think Mike's going to be teeing up the online resources that you all have available to you. That includes a one-pager kind of cheat sheet. It really condenses the issues, which can be really nice if you're not well versed in a particular issue. You just kind of want the overarching points here. But if you want to dive deeper into the issues to kind of understand, I think that there's plenty of information there as well in the talking points. One question that came up actually from Bob Kylan. Bob, thanks for the question. It was just the observation, right, that there have been trillions of dollars being thrown out there kind of in response to the devastation that the pandemic has done across the entire society. And so what if you are in a congressional meeting and the response from the member of Congress is, we've already done a lot. We just need to sift through the things that we've already done and be done with it. I think, an appropriate response in that, recognizing that I think that response will be rare because the House has already passed an additional package. The Senate is actively considering a package. And so there's a lot of interest still in filling those gaps. The first packages really were trying to stimulate the immediate losses, but we have more information now about where things were falling through the gaps, what wasn't covered. And so this is an opportunity to kind of tell that story and what are those ongoing needs. But probably more important is that a number of the things that Farmers Union has been fighting for a long time, whether it's working markets, concentration, et cetera, and on climate, a lot of these things are beyond really the pandemic. The pandemic has exposed cattle markets are a huge example. It's exposed to a lot of people what we as farmers and ranchers have known for a long time, right? And so the issues that we're talking about isn't necessarily about additional money out there, but structural changes to level the playing field and create a more fair market out there to give farmers and ranchers a fair shake in the process there. Excuse me, let me turn it over to Mike here.
Thanks, Rob. And I just wanted to point out that on the website, nfu.org/fly-in, you can find all sorts of resources up there. We've got a few different purposes. I mean, we built them with a few different uses in mind. So if you go to the website, you see the intro screen there, and you can see the fly-in agenda, which we covered earlier on in this discussion, but you can take a look at that. Always good to know what's coming up next. And then, of course, you'll also be able to access much of that information through the app email that will go out from a little later this week. And then the talking points documents. Really, there's 3 different ways to use them. One is if you're following along during a meeting and let's say you've got your phone out like I usually, well, I guess it looks like a cow. You get your phone out like I usually do. You can click on the talking points section, and it's a very mobile-friendly way to look at the points that we discussed just over the last parts of this session, along with live links to learn more about the topics we talked about. I mean, we just scratched the surface of these details. If you want to do a deep dive, as some of you have done with the questions, which have been really good, you can dig in a little more using the links there. So that's the online version of the talking points. You can also use, in case you've got a printer at home and you'd rather have a hard copy next to you as you walk or go through the meetings, you can access a PDF, printer-friendly PDF that covers many of those same points, and it can be pretty useful. But my favorite of all those documents is the cheat sheet. The cheat sheet is what it says it is. It's 1 page long, hits the big points, the big asks, and is kind of color-coded like that. So it's easy to use, and if there's anything you need to know that you must know, it's on this sheet. But again, one thing that's important to remember through all the fly-in points and all the policies we discussed is that the most important thing you can do during the fly-in is connect with your member of Congress or their staff with a story, or make a personal connection with them so that they know that Farmers Union's out there, that we've got some priorities. You don't have to talk about all of them, but if you make a point about one of them, that will stick with them. We can follow up as NFU staff to do all that. But the most important thing you can do, again, is to connect with them. And it's so hard to connect with people these days personally, but hopefully with this online format, you can do some of that. And now I think, Rob, I'm ready for some questions. The GR staff is ready for some questions. I know a lot of you have submitted them. We likely won't be able to get through all of them in the next 10 minutes or so, but we can at least cover a few, and we'll get back to you if we couldn't touch them just now. So let's take a look at some of those questions. Rob, did you see any that jumped out at you right away, or should I dive into some?
Absolutely. So a really important question came up about how to, really the issue of country of origin labeling, and how, is there a renewed effort? There certainly is from groups, and we're part of a lot of coalitions that try to reignite, if you will, the movement to restore mandatory country of origin labeling. There isn't that much activity up on Capitol Hill right now on the issue. However, because we have been such stalwart supporters of that, and it ties in really nicely into the impact on markets, particularly cattle markets, and all of the issues surrounding concentration and building a more resilient system for independent ranchers out there. I think talking about country of origin labeling is absolutely a fair point to be raising in these meetings. Again, all this information is going to seem like, how do you fit all this into a meeting? Don't worry about covering absolutely everything. That's not the point. As Mike said, the point is really making that connection with your stories. What does it mean on your operation, these particular challenges? You will be, we'll make sure that all those offices have information that will be left with them that they can further go down through. Our government relations team will be following up with every office that you're meeting with to do any of the kind of follow through. The value and the importance that you guys bring are those personal stories. So whether it's country of origin labeling or some other aspect that you want to bring in to talk about and really hammer home your point, I think that's absolutely fair game. Let me look for more questions. Mike, if you see one, jump in.
I've got a list of questions here that could be helpful. Let's see. So one question came in that asked, what do you attribute the 4.8% drop in farm prices? How is this unique compared to previous years? And that's a good question. It's unfortunately not unique. We've been seeing a general trend down in commodity prices since about 2013. When I talk about commodity prices, I'm talking about corn, wheat, and soybeans, and a lot of other kind of staple commodities like that. And as that has eroded, as those prices have generally shifted downward, we've seen more reliance on federal government payments, but also a steady erosion in debt to equity ratios. And I guess an increase in debt to equity ratios, or a loss of farms, frankly, for that matter. In some sectors, dairy in particular, we've seen many farm bankruptcies in the last just several years. And the decline we saw this year in farm prices, 4.8%, not unexpected, I guess, after the trends we've seen in recent years. So it does suggest, and I think this came up during some of the points others made, that just throwing more federal money at this issue and not addressing the root causes of a market that's oversupplied or anti-competitive marketplace for farmers, it's not going to fix the issue. It's just a Band-Aid, a very big Band-Aid at that too. So it's time to start thinking bigger about how to solve some of those problems. A good question, and thanks for bringing that up. Hopefully that helped out.
Mike, as you look through the questions there as well, I do notice that some of the really great questions are kind of getting down into some of the details here, and we'll try to get responses to you, whether it's information on meat plants in states. As you might imagine, we're stretched a little bit thin here, but we'll try to get some of this information answered as quickly as we can. But again, keeping in mind that these meetings may be shorter than they're even scheduled for if the members of Congress have other competing issues, as they often do. And so being concise and clear and weaving those stories is, I think, going to be a really good course. And my guess is that if this is not your first time in there, you'll be surprised how quickly the meeting goes and suddenly it's over. So again, there will be the follow-up that government relations staff does to kind of help provide the rest of the information and background here.
I think we've got a quick question. This one, I think Jenny Hopkinson would be best suited to answer. It's asking what specific legislation has been proposed on carbon sequestration. You mentioned a little bit about that. And are there financial incentives for farmers yet for carbon sequestration?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think on that front, what I'll say is that most of the incentives for farmers at this point are coming from the private sector. There's groups like NORI, Indigo Ag, ESMC, and others that are looking at and figuring out and recruiting farmers to help them test how to basically just do that, pay farmers to sequester carbon, normally through a combination of cover crops and no-till. On the legislative front, there's been a lot of talk about this, but there's nothing that's truly bubbled to the top just yet. I think most notably, there are proposals out there looking at how you'd create a tax credit for farmers and ranchers to sequester carbon. And so that runs into a lot of problems in terms of tax burden and how you do that. But certainly it's an issue that lawmakers are showing a lot of interest in right now, kind of how we encourage the sequestration of carbon, though we're not quite as far as having firm legislation on specifically doing that. Now, what we do have is the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which goes back to that private sector piece that I talked about before. And that would, that bill, which is sponsored by Senators Debbie Stabenow from Michigan and Mike Braun from Indiana, would kind of look to create an infrastructure at USDA to certify technical service providers who want to work with farmers to help them engage in these markets. It would create an advisory panel to help guide USDA as it looks at carbon markets and what its role should be in that. And it kind of looks to bridge that gap between farmers and these carbon markets. And so we've supported that, and it is one of our fly-in asks. So that's really the lay of the land on legislation related to carbon sequestration.
Thanks, Jenny. Maybe finally here, there was also a comment about separate from fly-in, but an issue that kind of relates to some of the issues that we're talking about, and that is the FTC comment period right now on a proposal for Made in the U.S., Made in America, and its relevance to USDA regulations and beef and pork. And NFU submitted very strong comments and encouraged most of the state organizations to do the same. And so we certainly have been getting those comments in there very quickly. So very much relevant to many of the issues here, but as was pointed out, that comment period is getting ready to end here very soon. With that, I know that there are additional questions out here. We will try to make sure that we can add some information a little bit later here. Follow up with us, reach out to us by email, and get your additional questions that you may have addressed. Take the time to pull up the website and look at everything from the cheat sheet, the one pager that's very condensed, to the lengthier kind of talking points document in its different formats. Take the time to play around with the virtual backgrounds, and whether or not that works for you, whether or not creates any kind of technical issues for you, try it out ahead of time. And please keep in mind that this is a new adventure for everybody here, in the sense that we haven't tried a virtual fly-in. The size and the scale of this is massive. But if anybody can pull this off, it is Farmers Union, because this is something that, as far as fly-ins or drive-ins or in the past, Farmers Union were pioneers in bringing their voices from the countryside to DC to make sure that they fully understood what the situation was and what needed to change. And we have adapted over the years to challenges, to different technology to try to make that happen. Right now, we're in this opportunity where we're trying a new approach here. There will be glitches. There will be other challenges. That's inherent in this. But your work, your voices, and your experience and stories are going to be critical for the organization to kind of move forward and promote positive change. We know the challenges are serious out there, and we really owe it to all of our neighbors in the next generation to do our level best here to get those messages across. Thank you once again for participating today. And keep in mind that you can come back and watch this at a later time if there's any parts of it that you missed. Thank you so much. And we look forward to fly-in next week. Take care.